Today we're going to talk about the difference between Zscaler and CrowdStrike. These are two very popular cybersecurity stocks. Now, whenever you're comparing two stocks, usually there's some similarity between the two. So you wouldn't try to compare, let's say, Proto Labs to Procter & Gamble. Those two companies have no relationship. However, you might compare Procter & Gamble to IBM. That's because they're both dividend growth stocks. That's the similarity there. Or you might compare Xometry to Proto Labs, since both those two firms are competitors. So the first question that we want to ask when we look at two firms is, do they compete? Now, in the B2B software space, this is very difficult to navigate across the board. So we would start by trying to define these firms, and what they say on the tin is a good enough place to start. So Zscaler refers to themselves as the zero trust leader. And then CrowdStrike says cloud native platform for protecting endpoints. So let's talk about the terminology. Zero trust. This is a very cool concept, and I'll put a link to articles we've written about Okta talking about this idea of zero trust, and it assumes that everyone in your network is a bad actor. So that's all about controlling what people can access and making sure they are who they say they are. Now, for endpoints, that's really simple. That's any device that connects to your network. So it could be a smartphone, a tablet, IoT sensor, server, etc. So if we had to paraphrase what these firms do, we'd say, well, Zscaler controls access to things, and CrowdStrike protects devices from being attacked by malicious software or actors. And we wrote about CrowdStrike, I think 5 years ago, when they were quite a small firm. And we were interested in their ability to use artificial intelligence to dynamically identify issues as opposed to signatures. You may recall in the days of like Norton antivirus, you'd have to download updates. Well, those updates were simply signatures for known threats. Well, these days, we want to identify threats as they pop up, and artificial intelligence allows us to do that. So the question then we need to ask is, can companies adopt both these solutions and run them concurrently? If they can, then clearly these firms are not competitors. The answer is yes, they can. So I took this slide from a CrowdStrike presentation that showed their relationship with Zscaler. This was back in 2020, and how the two firms are working more closely together. This was accelerated by the Rona, where everybody started working from home. And it's not important to make sense of this diagram. It's simply useful for those that can find value from it. You can see on the bottom there where it shows the Zscaler client connector interfacing with this CrowdStrike agent called Falcon, which is this lightweight software component that tries to identify threats. Now, to classify these firms into a bucket, we can also turn to Gartner's MBAs, and here they've put together two quadrants for CrowdStrike and Zscaler. Start in the upper left here, you can see that for endpoint protection programs, CrowdStrike and Microsoft are leaders and competing against one another, and that's a difficult place to be. Microsoft's huge, $1.7 trillion company. They're somewhere around 70 times the size of CrowdStrike. In the lower right, you can see the quadrant for something called Security Service Edge. This is a new term that Gartner's MBAs came up with. You can see Zscaler is competing against names like McAfee, Cisco, Palo Alto, and Netscope. So when we talk about Security Service Edge, this is an article that somebody had published describing what it is, and it starts out with this sentence: what the world needs is another acronym in cybersecurity, said absolutely no one. Exactly, and they don't need more terminology. And again, going back to our original comment about how difficult it is to figure out what companies do, there are so many different ways of describing what they do and various acronyms and things like that. So let's just dive into the similarities between these two firms. And frankly, there were far more than I had thought when we started putting this all together. So they both address the same total addressable market size, not the same TAM, but the same size TAM, each being around $70 billion. Neither firm has more than 4% market share for their respective TAMs, so lots of room to grow. They have leadership position in their respective fields, as we just looked at in the Gartner quadrants. They realize juicy gross margins around 80%. Net retention rates are in the low to mid 120s. They sell to at least 25% of Global 2000 and 40% of Fortune 500. Both firms sell internationally, Zscaler being around half the revenues from the States, while CrowdStrike is higher, around 70% of their revenues from the States. And they're both found in 3 of the 4 largest cybersecurity ETFs. This is an analysis we did looking at the 3 largest cybersecurity firms, and I'll put a link to that piece in the description of this video. And we simply looked at the commonalities in terms of constituents across the 4 biggest cybersecurity ETFs. You can see here Fortinet was found across all 4 ETFs, the only company. Then you have, of course, CrowdStrike and Zscaler in 3 out of 4 of these ETFs. Now, when we look at revenue growth, this is pretty interesting. So we plotted growth all the way back to the second quarter of 2018. You can see at that time, Zscaler actually had more revenues than CrowdStrike. And look at the progression. So over time, CrowdStrike moved ahead. And today you could see where they're sitting there. What's interesting is in the lower right here, the compound annual growth rate taken at different intervals. You can see that across 18 quarters, just that change in 3%. So CrowdStrike had a CAGR of 11%, while Zscaler, those are mixed up, right? So what says CrowdStrike there on the legend should be Zscaler. So let's just flip those around. But you can see CrowdStrike has marginally better compound annual growth, and look how far they moved away from Zscaler over time. It just goes to show the power of compound annual growth. Now, since they're not competitors, this isn't really valid to say, well, CrowdStrike's a bigger firm. I think they're bigger by like $7 billion. Or CrowdStrike has more revenues, because it's just not that solid of an argument, especially when they're not competing. So just recently, we had looked at CrowdStrike's valuation. Here you can see this piece, CrowdStrike stock, what's a fair valuation? And that's a good piece to check out, because we analyzed the valuation using what's called a simple valuation ratio. This is kind of like price to sales, except it uses an annualized revenue number from the latest quarter. That means it's more sensitive, right? So CrowdStrike had dipped below 13 when you calculate that ratio out. It had fell below 13 on several occasions. And we had said in that piece, well, if it goes below 15, then we'll consider possibly going long. But we wanted to wait for earnings. And we always wait for earnings because these days it's more likely than not that a firm is going to disappoint. Sure enough, they disappointed and shares corrected 20%. That also brought Zscaler down as well, because cybersecurity stocks tend to move together. So we used that opportunity to start a position, and somebody had raised the question, well, which of these firms is better, CrowdStrike or Zscaler? And honestly, it really comes down to personal preference. So just to conclude, every CTO knows the ultimate CLM is their name on the front page of the WSJ. Now, that's a case of TMA, too many acronyms. But CLM is a classic term used in corporations. It's called career limiting move. And that's the biggest worry that a CTO has, is a breach where their customer list appears out there in some domain where the hackers have released it because they didn't pay some ransom. So cybersecurity spending isn't going anywhere, and these particular firms appear to complement one another rather than compete. Now, this domain is changing very fast, and that's because private equity firms, PitchBook had actually written about this, are purchasing quite a few cybersecurity names. KnowBe4, Darktrace, and there's several others. Actually, they had said, I think over the last year, there was somewhere around 155 cybersecurity acquisitions by PE firms. They're looking to consolidate, and a common theme among CTOs is we don't want to go to 10 different providers to protect our organization. We want to go to one provider. So private equity firms are seeing decent valuations in this domain, and they're stepping in and consolidating. So that provides some price support. So Many of you have asked how you can help support our channel, and one of the things that you can do is subscribe. And on the right-hand side here, you can see this blue button that says Nanalyze. Just click that and click yes to subscribe. And after that, on the left here, I've put a link to our recent piece on CrowdStrike and their valuation. So that's a good video to watch next. So thanks for taking the time to watch this today. Make sure to share our videos with anybody that you think might find it useful. Thank you.